Blake Lively has found herself at the center of a massive scandal after publicly admitting that she was, in fact, the anonymous source behind a controversial 2020 New York Times article.
To see somebody who's not flailing or trying to figure out who they are or grasping, someone who really has both feet on the ground.
An article she had vehemently denied being involved with for months. The piece portrayed her as a victim of a calculated Hollywood smear campaign, allegedly orchestrated by her It Ends With Us co-star, Justin Baldoni. At the time, Blake claimed she had no input in the story and insisted the narrative was based entirely on public court filings and investigative journalism.
And has a strong sense of self, also lose themselves and not realize that they're losing themselves.
However, in a stunning and dramatic turn of events inside a courtroom, she finally confessed that she did, indeed, give an off-the-record interview to The Times, a revelation that completely unraveled the foundation of her public image. Her confession wasn't just a simple clarification. It was the equivalent of setting fire to her own carefully constructed persona.
It was both utility and then fabulous glam. It was masculine and feminine. It was old and new.
For months, Blake had presented herself as an innocent bystander, a woman unfairly targeted by Hollywood's dark underbelly. That image helped her maintain public sympathy, disarm critics, and protect her reputation. But by admitting she was the direct source feeding information to the press, Blake has effectively destroyed the very narrative she used to shield herself. It's not just a lie, it's a lie about lying. And that has proven far more damaging than any smear campaign she previously claimed to be a victim of. The timing of her confession is also suspect. It came just days before attorney Brian Friedman, representing Justin Baldoni, is set to file an explosive amended complaint that reportedly includes damning evidence of Blake's direct involvement in orchestrating media attacks. This includes a timeline of press leaks that began months before Blake filed any official legal claims, indicating a premeditated strategy to destroy Baldoni's reputation while preserving her own. Her sudden about-face in court appears less like a moment of moral reckoning and more like a desperate move to get ahead of a legal disaster she could no longer contain. Ultimately, Blake's admission is more than just a PR nightmare. It's a turning point. The woman once hailed as Hollywood's golden girl, admired for her elegance, wit, and integrity, is now being seen in a far less flattering light. Her confession has exposed not only her involvement in the media narrative, but also a willingness to manipulate public perception for personal gain. In doing so, she may have irreparably damaged both her legal standing and her legacy in the entertainment industry. The New York Times article that Blake Lively secretly contributed to was a major turning point in the ongoing legal and public relations battle surrounding It Ends With Us. Published in December 2020, the article framed Blake as a victim, a Hollywood actress allegedly subjected to mistreatment on set and targeted by a calculated smear campaign led by co-star Justin Baldoni and his team. The tone was deeply sympathetic, casting her as a brave figure who endured emotional hardship in silence. However, what readers didn't know, and what Blake adamantly denied at the time, was that she herself had secretly fed information to the journalist Megan Tuhey, who co-wrote the piece. At the time, neither the New York Times nor Blake disclosed that she had given an interview for the story. The article presented its details as coming from anonymous sources and court documents, creating the illusion that the Times independently uncovered the full narrative. Blake took advantage of this ambiguity, repeatedly insisting in public and private statements that she had no hand in shaping the piece. She used this denial to maintain an image of victimhood, claiming the Times reached its conclusions entirely on its own. This strategy allowed her to position herself as a wronged party without appearing manipulative or self-serving. What makes this more damaging is the fact that Blake weaponized the article in court and in the media while pretending to be uninvolved. She cited its claims as validation of her side of the story, despite knowing she had directly contributed to them. In essence, she created the narrative and then used it as external evidence to support her legal and personal attacks on Baldoni. This revelation now casts serious doubt on her credibility and raises questions about how much of her public persona was manufactured for strategic gain. Her attempt to frame herself as a silent victim of Hollywood politics has backfired spectacularly, exposing her as the architect of a media manipulation campaign that may come back to haunt her in court. Blake Lively's courtroom confession didn't just expose a hidden truth, it detonated her entire public persona. For months, she clung tightly to the narrative that she had nothing to do with the New York Times article, claiming she was merely a target of Hollywood's dark machinery. That carefully constructed story positioned her as a symbol of resilience, a woman weathering unjust attacks from powerful industry insiders like Justin Baldoni. But with one sentence in court, "Actually, I did give them an interview," the illusion shattered. The revelation left the courtroom in stunned silence, and for good reason. Blake hadn't just misled the public, she had deceived them while building a career off her polished, trustworthy image. What makes this moment so devastating is that Blake didn't just lie, she lied about lying. That level of deception doesn't just create skepticism, it obliterates credibility. The very foundation of her case, her emotional appeal to the public and her media campaign all hinged on one core belief: that she was telling the truth. Now, every previous statement is cast in doubt, every tearful anecdote re-examined under the harsh light of contradiction. Her confession didn't just undermine one claim, it unraveled her entire narrative. Moreover, this admission came not from a place of accountability, but seemingly from fear. With Justin Baldoni's attorney Brian Friedman set to release a damning amended complaint, sources suggest Blake's legal team saw the writing on the wall. Rather than be exposed by external documents, she attempted to control the narrative one last time by admitting the truth on her own terms. But that strategy has largely failed. Her confession wasn't seen as brave, it was seen as desperate. And now, the woman once praised for her poise and honesty is facing an identity crisis in the court of public opinion, one that may prove irreversible. The fallout from Blake Lively's confession extends far beyond embarrassment. It strikes at the heart of her entire legal battle with Justin Baldoni. Her acknowledgement that she fed information to the New York Times exposes a critical contradiction in her lawsuit, which was filed in November 2024. In that complaint, Blake accused Baldoni and his team of leaking confidential information and launching a smear campaign against her. She painted herself as a woman retaliated against for daring to speak out, claiming that damaging press coverage was part of a coordinated attack designed to destroy her reputation. But her own timeline doesn't hold up. Evidence now shows that negative articles about Baldoni began circulating as early as August 2024, months before Blake filed any legal action or alleged retaliation. This directly challenges her claim that she was being targeted in response to her lawsuit. Instead, it supports Baldoni's argument that he was the one being preemptively defamed, possibly in anticipation of future legal fallout. In fact, the PR attacks appeared to intensify just before Blake's court filings, suggesting a calculated campaign rather than spontaneous retaliation. Even more damning is that Blake's lawsuit never mentioned sexual harassment, the very issue she used to fuel media sympathy. While her public statements emphasized being a survivor of misconduct, her actual legal complaint focused almost entirely on the alleged leaking of private emails and the protection of her image. This disconnect between her public messaging and legal arguments makes her intentions seem less about justice and more about control. The core of her case is now being viewed not as a pursuit of accountability, but as an effort to rewrite the public narrative in her favor. By confessing that she fed details to the press while accusing Baldoni of the same, Blake has undercut her own credibility in the courtroom and the court of public opinion. It's no longer just about what happened behind the scenes. It's about who manipulated the spotlight first, and Blake's fingerprints are now all over the playbook. Attorney Brian Friedman, who represents Justin Baldoni, is preparing to deliver what many are calling a legal knockout blow to Blake Lively's case. Known for his aggressive and precise litigation style, Friedman has reportedly been working for weeks on an amended complaint that is expected to dismantle Blake's narrative with sharp, evidence-based arguments. Sources claim the revised filing is not just a routine update. It's a meticulously constructed legal weapon, backed by a paper trail of emails, texts, timelines, and witness statements that directly contradict Blake's claims. The complaint, set to drop on June 23rd, is said to include compelling proof that Blake, not Baldoni, orchestrated the negative media narrative months before she filed her own lawsuit. Friedman is also reportedly including evidence that Blake worked closely with journalist Megan Tuhey and possibly involved her husband Ryan Reynolds in efforts to pressure media outlets like the New York Times. This directly supports Baldoni's assertion that he was the target of a coordinated defamation campaign, not the perpetrator of one. Adding fuel to the fire, Friedman's team believes Blake's recent confession, admitting she did in fact speak to the Times, only strengthens their position. It suggests she was attempting to get ahead of the incoming legal exposure, hoping that admitting the truth on her own terms would soften the blow. But in legal circles, the timing is seen less as noble and more as strategic damage control. Friedman's amended filing is expected to argue that Blake not only lied about her involvement with the press, but also misled the court, the media, and the public with carefully curated half-truths. Ultimately, this complaint could be a turning point in the entire case. If the documents and evidence Friedman is rumored to have truly show a pattern of manipulation, false claims, and strategic leaks, Blake Lively's lawsuit could collapse. and her credibility along with it. Blake Lively's entire public image, once built on charm, relatability, and grace, has now been torn apart by her own contradictions, and nowhere is that more evident than in the timeline of media coverage surrounding her case. According to public records and leaked documents, negative stories about Justin Baldoni began appearing in major outlets as early as August 2024, which is a full month before Blake even filed her retaliation lawsuit in November. This timing is crucial because it directly contradicts her core claim that Baldoni and his team waged a media war against her in response to her legal action. But here's the twist. Those stories didn't come out of nowhere. They were highly specific, emotional, and perfectly tailored to cast Baldoni as controlling, manipulative, and even predatory. Many now believe this media blitz wasn't retaliation. It was preemptive damage control. And since Blake has now admitted to feeding the New York Times material for one of the most explosive pieces, it's clear she played a proactive role in shaping public perception before any formal court filings were made. It's no longer a question of whether she was the victim of a smear campaign, it's a question of whether she was the one orchestrating it. Further discrediting her narrative is the fact that Blake's lawsuit never included any allegations of sexual harassment, despite her public statements and media appearances heavily implying otherwise. The actual legal complaint focused on the leaking of confidential information, reputational harm, and PR management, not misconduct. That glaring omission casts serious doubt on her intentions. If the harassment claims were central to her grievance, why leave them out of the official filing? The answer now seems obvious. They may have been part of a crafted media narrative, not a legal strategy. In the end, the timeline Blake hoped no one would scrutinize is now the smoking gun in Justin Baldoni's defense. It paints a picture not of a woman reacting to injustice, but of one trying to control the story before the truth surfaced. One of the most glaring contradictions in Blake Lively's legal strategy is the disconnect between her public victim narrative and the actual content of her lawsuit. While she made emotional public statements suggesting she was a survivor of harassment and retaliation, her official legal complaint, filed in November 2024, didn't mention sexual harassment at all. Instead, it focused narrowly on alleged leaks of confidential information and the harm to her reputation caused by media coverage. That omission is not just a legal technicality. It fundamentally undermines the credibility of her entire case. For months, Blake framed herself as a voice for women in Hollywood, subtly aligning her story with broader #MeToo narratives to generate public sympathy. She gave the impression that her legal battle was rooted in standing up to misconduct and abuse of power. But when it came time to present her claims in a court of law, the very allegations she emphasized publicly were absent. This has led critics to accuse her of weaponizing feminism and survivor language to manipulate public opinion, while quietly building a legal case focused more on PR fallout than personal harm. Even worse, she fought aggressively to obtain emails and text messages from Baldoni's team, claiming they would prove a coordinated attack against her. But once obtained, those messages reportedly revealed her own hypocrisy, showing her team discussing media strategy and damage control months before Baldoni even retained a crisis PR expert. This doesn't just chip away at her case, it flips it entirely. The supposed retaliation she accused Baldoni of appears more like a response to a smear campaign she initiated. In the eyes of many, Blake's selective use of allegations, her manipulation of timing, and her contradictory public versus legal claims suggest she wasn't seeking justice. She was seeking control over the narrative. And now that the truth is coming out, her case is beginning to look less like a fight for accountability and more like a calculated PR stunt gone horribly wrong. Blake Lively's attempts to control the narrative didn't stop at legal filings and press interviews. They extended into online communities, where she and her team allegedly sought to manipulate public discourse. One of the most revealing examples of this is what happened on the It Ends With Us subreddit, a fan-driven space originally meant for discussion about the book and movie adaptation. By June 2025, this subreddit had reportedly morphed into a pro-Blake propaganda machine, with moderators allegedly removing posts that questioned her claims or offered support to Justin Baldoni. Users began noticing a disturbing pattern. Critical comments were deleted, discussions challenging Blake's story were shut down, and some moderators were accused of selectively banning those who didn't align with her narrative. This level of control sparked backlash across Reddit and other platforms, with many calling it an example of digital censorship orchestrated by a celebrity's PR machine. It painted a troubling picture. Not only was Blake trying to steer the media narrative, she was also trying to rewrite public opinion on grassroots forums. This effort to dominate online spaces backfired spectacularly. What was meant to be a controlled environment turned into a case study in how public manipulation can erode trust. Once fans and casual observers saw that even neutral spaces were being tightly managed to favor Blake's perspective, it deepened the suspicion that she wasn't being fully honest. The subreddit's transformation from open discussion forum to PR echo chamber became symbolic of Blake's broader campaign. Control everything, silence dissent, and protect the brand at all costs. In the process, she alienated not just skeptics, but many of her own supporters. What once felt like a grassroots outpouring of sympathy became a curated illusion, one that crumbled as soon as her behind-the-scenes efforts came to light. It was yet another example of how Blake's need to control the story, online, in court, and in the press, ultimately undermined her credibility across the board. Blake Lively's PR strategy reached a breaking point during the promotional tour for It Ends With Us, a moment that was supposed to highlight her as a leading actress in a powerful, socially relevant film. Instead, it became one of the most tone-deaf PR disasters in recent Hollywood memory. While promoting a movie centered around domestic violence, Blake chose to spotlight her alcohol brand, Betty Booze, sometimes even more prominently than the film itself. In one especially cringeworthy moment, a news anchor cracked open a can of her cocktail on air while discussing the film's heavy themes. The optics were disastrous. But the real outrage erupted when Blake hosted a film premiere in December 2024 that featured themed cocktails named after characters from the movie, including the abuser. That move sparked immediate backlash. Fans of the book, especially on TikTok and in Colleen Hoover fan groups, were furious. Domestic violence advocates called it deeply inappropriate and exploitative. Instead of honoring the sensitive nature of the story, Blake appeared to be commercializing abuse for product placement, blurring the line between artistic message and personal branding in the worst possible way. This misstep didn't just offend, it alienated. Entire communities that once supported her began to distance themselves. Book talk exploded with criticism. Hoover's readers felt betrayed. Even some members of the media called out the hypocrisy of promoting a message of female empowerment while profiting off trauma. The fallout was swift and widespread, with the incident becoming a lightning rod for everything wrong with celebrity influence and unchecked ego. What should have been a triumphant PR moment turned into a symbol of how far Blake had strayed from authenticity. Her image, once synonymous with grace and relatability, began to feel artificial and self-serving. And the consequences extended beyond social media backlash. Her credibility as a voice for survivors took a hit, and even the film itself suffered as box office projections plummeted. What started as a celebration of art and advocacy ended as a masterclass in how not to manage a brand, especially when dealing with sensitive subject matter. The chaos surrounding Blake Lively's legal and public unraveling has now reportedly spilled into her personal life, with growing speculation that her marriage to Ryan Reynolds is hanging by a thread. Once seen as Hollywood's golden couple, Blake and Ryan's relationship is now under intense scrutiny, with sources suggesting that Ryan has been distancing himself both emotionally and professionally in the wake of her courtroom confession and the mounting controversy. Insiders claim Ryan, ever the diplomat, initially tried to support Blake through the It Ends With Us drama, but her lies, manipulation, and PR misfires may have pushed him to his breaking point. Reports indicate Ryan has been spending more time on solo projects, staying focused on his own production company and keeping his public image intact, one that's based on humility, humor, and relatability. The contrast between his brand and Blake's increasingly chaotic presence couldn't be starker. While she battles allegations of media manipulation, weaponized victimhood, and unethical PR tactics, Ryan appears to be quietly reassessing the cost of association, especially as some brands and industry partners have allegedly started to pull back due to the scandal. Even more telling are rumors of heated arguments behind closed doors, with Ryan reportedly confronting Blake about how her actions are affecting their family and public standing. Sources say their once playful dynamic has soured, replaced by visible strain. And Friedman's legal filings have only worsened the situation, directly naming Ryan and suggesting he may have colluded with Blake and the New York Times to smear Justin Baldoni. If true, that puts Ryan's own credibility and legal exposure on the line, something his meticulously curated career can hardly afford. Now, with Ryan allegedly seriously weighing his options, the fall of Blake Lively may be about more than just legal consequences or media fallout. It could signal the collapse of her marriage, too. Losing Ryan wouldn't just be a personal blow, it would be a symbolic moment marking the full dismantling of the public image Blake once so carefully maintained. The woman who had it all, career, fans, family, now appears to be losing everything, piece by piece, and the world is watching it unfold in real time.